What's happening, fellas? It's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you after UFC 244, the BMF fight for the bitch-ass no wrestling belt. Let's talk about it. I thought it was great. I thought it was a really good fight. I thought Masvidal looked amazing. I thought Nate Diaz looked the same as he always does. And I thought that while the stoppage was daft from a cut perspective, people being like, run it back. No. Why? Why are you wasting clearly a top welterweight's time with Nate Diaz? Sounds harsh, but you know, what has Nate Diaz done in that weight class? And what has Nate Diaz done in the last, well, I don't know, he's got 4 wins since 2012. One of them's over Gray Maynard. So there's really not a lot going on in Diaz Town that really justifies a rematch of this. But let's talk about the fight. I did a Filthy Casuals guide to Jorge Masvidal. It's blown up. It's doing really well hit-wise as for a Filthy Casuals guide, so that was really good. Thanks if you're sharing it. If you aren't sharing it, go share it. But yeah, I went through something like 30 fights of his and picked out some of the habits and the adjustments he made, and he just went through them one after the other against Nate Diaz. I mean, all the stuff we talked about. Actually, this was a pretty good event because I did an article about Darren Till versus Kelvin Gastelum. All the stuff I talked about in that article happened. Same with the Stephen Thompson, Vicente Luque, and same with the main event. So I'm feeling like I at least have my finger on the pulse a little bit of what's going on. But Jorge Masvidal said he was one of the best body kickers in MMA, particularly because he can do it without being scared of being taken down, but always targets the open side. You saw him gliding back away from Diaz, then he'd pop the right kick in the body, and then fight off the takedown or go straight to the clinch. Clinch was really important in this fight. In the Filthy Casuals guide, I pointed out that he doesn't really strike from the clinch all that often or well. You know, if you compare him to someone like Leon Edwards, God, that fight would be good. But if you compare him to someone like Leon Edwards, he really isn't very active with strikes from the clinch. What he does is he props himself up against the fence and he fights off takedowns and mean mugs. But in this fight, yeah, active with strikes. Started posting his head, kneeing the body. Always have said, go for body shots against the Diaz brothers because one, it's, you know, if you're going to waste your time trying to knock them out with head trauma and break your hands doing it, what's the point? But two, like, if their whole thing is that they've got a good pace and great conditioning, and one of the ways you can offset that is by hitting them in the body, because they're going to hit you in the body. They know it tires you out, so hit them in the body all the way in, and the body doesn't really move. You can't really roll punches to the body very well. You just have to take them, especially if you're coming straight forward. So he was kicking the body, he was kneeing the body from the head post, and then he was not only elbowing on the brakes, but looking for the collar tie to hold an elbow. And you don't see Jorge Masvidal using the collar ties very much at all. You know, he's more on underhooks and break away from the fence, and you know, that sort of fighter doesn't really like hold an elbow. But he was looking for it in this fight, and the very first couple of elbows he landed one like on a little break thing, kind of like the Cesar Ferreira one, and then he got the collar tie, hit a knee and an elbow off the same side, and he cut Diaz open, and that was the one that stopped the fight ultimately. But he went through it throughout. He was looking for elbows from the clinch, using the clinch to smother Diaz. You know, we talk about how both Diaz's, their footwork is the main. Footwork and stance is the main letdown of their style. They fight very side-on, which is peculiar because they like to put in punches with both hands, so they have to square up eventually to do it. But they come in very, very side-on with their lead shoulder and lead leg way out there. And that means that you can kick the lead leg across the body quite easily. But it also means that when you get past their lead shoulder, you know, if you're orthodox versus southpaw, you take a step out to your left. Once you get past their lead shoulder, they don't really have a lot of pop to hit you with because their shoulder is right there. They have to swing their arm behind their shoulder and come back in with like a slap, you know, Stockton slap. But, you know, they don't have a lot to punish you on that side. Whereas if you watch someone like, who's a really good ring cutter? John Lineker, you know, he's quite square, so he can throw with his right hand, you know, his right hook to the body with some force and twist his hips, but he can also come straight out with the left hook. If he was very side on, he wouldn't have so much threat from his left side. And I put up a little clip on Twitter and Facebook, and they sort of blew up. I just said, this is the main problem with the Diaz footwork, and it was a clip that summarized the entire outside portion of the fight. Diaz comes in, he slaps at Jorge's lead hand. We talked about this. We said hand fighting with Jorge Masvidal it has worked very effectively for some southpaws. Tim Means and Darren Till both shut down his jab by doing that. You know, against Darren Till, he was having to go around the outside. He was having to switch to southpaw, throw overhand lefts and things. And he did, obviously knocked out Darren Till, but he was having to do stuff that wasn't his A game. And we're always talking about taking away people's A games, and especially if their A game is the A game, the jab, which is like, if you have a better jab than the opponent, you should win. That's how that should work. Striking at range, at least. But Diaz wasn't hand fight. He was like, slap the lead hand, and then you saw every time he came in, he'd either drop his hand to swing a right hook to the body, or swing his right hand out wide to flail at the head. And in doing that, he just opened up that line again. So the clip I put up, he steps in to swing for a right hook, eats the jab, because as soon as you take your hand off Jorge Masvidal's lead hand, it's going to jab you in the face when you step in. And then Masvidal just slides out down the side. Hit him with a one-piece non-combo and slid out of there. And that was just the theme of the fight. You saw Diaz, even when he gets people against the fence, if they circle off, he lets them. It's really strange. He lets them, and he mean mugs. And the other thing is, once you step past his lead foot, you're basically behind his back. Him and Nick, there's these weird moments in their fights where they're basically facing away from the opponent. And obviously, they're pretty fearless. They're not bothered about it. But you can't attack someone when they're behind you. It's not conducive to the kind of fight that they want to fight, because we know the fight they want to fight. They want to be up in their opponent's face fighting all the time, and you can't do that if you're just going to stand side on and let them circle around you. The thing that did intrigue me was that there wasn't an awful lot of low kicking in this fight. There wasn't low kicking in the sense that we expected it, the round kick to the leg, taking the leg across Diaz himself, which is that has been typically a great combination with movement, because if you kick his leg across himself, it's kind of like when we were talking about parrying the leg or dragging the leg on the feet off a kick. You're taking an angle without actually taking an angle. You kick his leg across himself, he's going to stumble, and you've got all the time in the world to circle out, as Benson Henderson did, Rafael dos Anjos, Conor McGregor, and he's working on checking, but every time he checks, he comes up into a square-on stance, and then he has to go back to his side-on stance. So there wasn't an awful lot of low kicking in that sense. There was some stomping on the leg, which Masvidal has always done. And any time you watch someone throw a low line side kick at Nate Diaz, you go, "Oh my god!" There was that really bad one in I think it's the first McGregor fight, when McGregor comes in on a low line side kick, and it basically stomps the side of Nate Diaz's lead leg inwards, because he's side on, so you're taking the brunt of the kick on the side of the knee. And it's pushing through, and you're going, fucking hell, that's the kind that you really don't want to take. People are worried about their knee getting inverted, but if you take a kick on a straight kick on the front of the leg, your leg's got some room to extend. If you take a kick on the side of the knee, your knee doesn't have an awful lot of sideways movement, lateral movement. So Masvidal was working with these side kicks and that weird, stomping teep he does across to the opponent's left leg when he's orthodox. Well, he was doing it straight across because he was against the southpaw in this one. But he was doing that, and then he was mixing in overhands from the left, from the southpaw stance. And those were the big ones he caught Diaz with, because Diaz was up on one leg, either trying to check or trying to kick back. That's one of the things that Diaz has found to help. It worked against Donald Cerrone to a degree, and it worked against McGregor, and it worked against Anthony Pettis by front kicking lots. He with his lead leg, he steps up and front kicks. It's a good way to stop the opponent kicking your leg, because your leg's not there, and also push kicking into them can knock them off balance while they're kicking. It's just Muay Thai 101, the short teep that you don't see in MMA, but you see all the time in Muay Thai, because you're standing in front of the dude, and you can just nudge him with your toes, and if he's kicking, he'll stumble backwards. But Diaz does a lot of that, stepping through on front kicks and things, and Masvidal was getting him into those that sort of mindset, and then cracking him with overhand lefts. Another thing I really liked was that when he stunned Diaz with the elbow out of the clinch, hit him with a kick in the head as he was sort of bending over, and then he was on top. And Diaz, generally very good at defending his head from guard. He's really making sure of it. So Masvidal starts punching him in the body instead, and it really didn't look like he cared about punching him in the head, so getting onto that body work almost immediately. I thought it was just a great performance from Masvidal. His ring craft was on point. It looked like, I pointed out before the fight, Masvidal is a good all-rounder with an excellent jab, which is, already an advantage, and he fights very well to a game plan. I showed all these instances of him changing his game to better suit the opponent. The stuff against Ross Pearson and KJ Noons, where he was trying to get them to lean into kicks and things. The stuff against Pat Healy, where he fought southpaw for large portions of the fight. He changes from fight to fight, but he stays. His style is his, and then he messes with the sliders, as I was saying last week, to sort out the ratios and get everything prepared for the specific opponent. So like, he doesn't strike from the clinch a lot, but in this fight, he was striking from the clinch. You know, he's capable of doing it, but clearly he put some extra effort into doing that at this fight. So, you know, like I said, it looked like a very disciplined, adaptable fighter who has the benefit of the American Top Team, who's one of the truly elite teams out there in terms of scouting. People like Mike Brown and the other guys, they're really good at scouting their opponents. Has the benefit of that, and fought to the game plan that they prepared. And that's the thing, you know, whenever you're talking about fights, it is a team thing. Like, if Jorge Masvidal was at some lesser team and he was having to work this out on his own, you know, I doubt he'd have the same level of success, but it's everything coming together. You've got a great fighter as a conduit for a Carlos conduit, a great fighter as like the paintbrush for the great team behind him. And the more disciplined a fighter is, the better you're going to have, you know, the better you're going to see that translated into the ring. Discipline is the thing that you can't buy, and that's something that Masvidal has. And I'm not saying like discipline like, you know, doing the diet and things like that. That's the stuff that most top fighters can do, with the exception of Kelvin Gastelum. But discipline in the sense that once you're in a firefight and you're either scared or doing the thing you absolutely love, you know, you're on one end of the terror/joy spectrum, but you're still supposed to stay cognizant of all the things you've been working on for months. You know, there are so many guys who get in there and they've been perfect in the gym and then they just get retarded in the ring. And Masvidal really isn't one of those guys. And, you know, that's consistently the most impressive thing, his discipline. So do we need a rematch? Fuck no, do we need a rematch? We need Nate Diaz to start fighting more regularly and proving that he deserves the kind of attention that he's getting. I was needling some Diaz fans this week because, you know, they are literally the worst. I mean, I complain about Valentina and Gegard Mousasi fans, but they're not there going, well, you know, he would have won in the fifth. You know, like, Diaz has gone to the fifth round twice and he lost both of those. People are like, oh, well, he comes on late. And I did say this in the, you know, he's known for his conditioning. It was going to be interesting to see how the conditioning held up. But at no point did Masvidal look like he was fading. He was the one beating the shit out of Diaz's body. And Diaz hasn't finished a fight that's gone beyond the second round since 2010. And that was Marcus Davis. So that tells you what era that was. He's lost the two fights that went 5 rounds. And even when he comes on late, he's famous for coming on late against guys like Conor McGregor, notorious fader. Anthony Pettis, notorious for fading. Gray Maynard is the other big win on his... Gray Maynard and Michael Johnson are the other big wins on it since the only wins since 2012. You know, for every time that I can recall him coming on strong in the end, he also lost was it the 4th or the 5th round against McGregor? Got beaten up in that one. Lost the 3rd round against Cerrone. Or Cerrone certainly did his best work in the 3rd round. So the idea that he's just an unstoppable force and the only thing that can stop him is a clock is bizarre. But, you know, he gets his way out, which is fantastic. This is exactly what... I mean, this is the best outcome because he was getting his ass whooped. And he... the moment the fight ended, Jorge Masvidal was like, oh, I'm so sorry it happened like that, you know. And Nate Diaz was like, yeah, they're trying to rob me. They're trying to stop me. I'm too real. They knew I was going to kill you in the 4th or the 5th. Anyway, let's talk about the rest of this card, because there was some other good, you know, there was plenty of good stuff on, and I just got obsessed with the main event there. Hakeem Dawodo versus Julio Arce was a strange one, because Julio Arce immediately threw the left high kick, got caught with a counter right low kick into his kicking leg, and then proceeded to continue doing that. Like, he did it all fight, and kept getting kicked in the leg on the counter. And the really weird part was that, like, he's stepping with his kick. It wasn't always Dawodo parrying the kick across himself and then kicking the back of the leg. He was just... Julio Arce would throw the left leg and then put the left leg down in front of himself. Otherwise, not a particularly interesting fight, but that counter was lush. Lyman Good versus Chance Rakonta was just Lyman Good taking forever to finally get the job done. You know, it was clear that Chance Rakonta was out of sorts on the feet, had no real idea what to do with Lyman Good. I would have loved to see it. There were some clinches, and I was going, just elbow on the break, because he was in a position where he could have elbowed on the break, and Lyman Good was sort of pushing him away. And he never really went to it. Like, Chance Rakonta never got into that fight, really. Skipped Chookagian versus Maia. Rosenstruck versus Arlovsky was standard heavyweight fight, standard Arlovsky fight. Walk forward, get face planted. Edmund Shabazian versus Brad Tavares. I really like the look of this guy, Shabazian. I think I said that the last time I saw him, and then I forgot him, and then I remembered him again just now. But beautiful straight shooting down the line, used the jab, set up the 1-2, stumbled Tavares, beautiful head kick for the finish. A couple of beautiful head kicks on this. I mean, this head kick looked like dog shit compared to the next head kick we got. Some great head kicks on this card. Shane Burgos versus Makwan Amakani. Jesus Christ, do you remember when Makwan Amakani was the future? There's an air of Gegard Mousasi to him, which is why I like watching him lose. But Jesus Christ, I remember people being like, this guy is an all-round threat. And then he just sprints after takedowns for the first round and gasses himself out. And then Burgos, who has always been a great body hitter, just keeps coming forward with body shots, drops Amakani, and then Amakani goes to his back to try and avoid the body shots, and Shane Burgos is in side control, and he turns, I don't know, reverse Kezakatami, so he's facing Makwan Amakani's hips, and then he uses his leg side knee to trap the arm to the floor in what would be, I suppose, a wrong side mounted crucifix, but it frees his right hand, the hand nearest Amakani's hips, frees it to punch him in the belly. So he's doing like a reverse mounted crucifix to punch the dude in the gut. It was fantastic. I will say, the referee should have stopped it when Makwan Amakani couldn't get up. Because Burgos stepped back, it was early in the third round, stepped back after he put him down and said, get up. And Amakani took about 15 seconds getting up, and he stumbled on the way up too. Pretty bad work by the corner. Who's that? That's SBGI, so John Kavanagh. I was just thinking in the third round, he ain't winning, so what's he learning? You know, not protecting the hardware and updating the software here, are we? But yeah, good showing from Burgos. To be honest, I was excited for this fight, but I did sort of think, why is Amakani getting this fight? Shane Burgos seems to be on the cusp of getting into the contention portion of the division, whereas Amakani is sort of like a mid-card guy. Corey Anderson versus Johnny Walker was just wild, scrappy bollocks, where Anderson caught him early and then finished. And I mean, it's nice that we don't have to we don't have another 20-second Johnny Walker win where we know nothing about him. But equally, it's hilarious Corey Anderson being like, there are levels to this, when he's probably the least consistent light heavyweight of all. Every time he looks good, you know, he lost to Shogun Hua, the ghost of Shogun Hua, Jimmy Manoa, opens some pro. I mean, he's on a streak of 4 now, so well done to him. But you know, to him being like, there's levels to this, is pretty funny. Kevin Lee versus Gregor Gillespie, loved it. Said it was one of my must-watch fights. And yeah, Kevin Lee, you know, obviously a very strong wrestler, but clearly Gregor Gillespie was concerned about taking him down, because he did a running knee slap, you know, not a knee tap, a knee slap with his inside hand to sort of threaten the takedown. I don't know if he's going after it, but he just did it right off the bat. And then the rest of it was them jabbing each other. Kevin Lee, obviously, what is it they say? High on the ape index if you've got really fucking long arms compared to your body. He's got something like an 80-inch reach at lightweight, which is insane. But, the struggle has always been using that. And I think that's one of the wonderful things. You know, I don't want to treat... There's people who treat, whatever camp is the camp at the moment as the answer to all your problems, or any fighter's problems. But, you know, Firas Zahabi and the TriStar lads, he's produced some very good jabbers. And Kevin Lee has a tremendous reach. You know, Firas has produced some very good jabbers with great wrestling. And Kevin Lee already has great wrestling and the build for a great jab. So you're set up pretty well there. He was out in a low stance, obviously, probably trying to prepare himself for the eventual shot that we all anticipated, but never actually came. But I liked how he was using his jab. I mean, they were trading jabs. They were both getting good jabs in. I've always said Gillespie's striking is meat and potatoes, but effective. But there was a nice one where Kevin Lee threw a 1-2 and then it fell short, and Gregor Gillespie was moving back in. But because Kevin Lee just flung out his jab to close the door, you know, which takes no effort. But if you've got 80-inch reach and the guy moves back in, you snap his head back immediately, you know. So that was pretty dope. And then the finish was Kevin Lee got his timing, slipped inside Gillespie's jab. You know, the jab had been annoying in bullfight, slipped inside it. Right hand across the top, cross counter. I don't know if I have to explain this every time, but the cross counter is literally the right hand going across the opponent's jab. That's where the name comes from. Whereas people refer to the right straight as the cross nowadays. But when I say cross counter, I mean it's probably an arcing blow, but it goes across the top of the opponent's jab. And then he stepped in and threw a high kick and knocked him out. And I was looking at this going, that's a really cool counter combination, which I don't think I've seen much. And the reason that I thought it was so cool was because when you see guys land the cross counter, the right hand across the top of the jab, It's a good closer because it often knocks the opponent out of his stance or off balance. I mean, it's a great knockout punch on its own. If you see, half the overhand knockouts you see will be an overhand across the top of the jab. It's the timing of it rather than, it is a cross counter, but it's an overhand. But really, it's the timing more than the technique, the punch itself that does the damage. It's a big swing timed over the top of the opponent's jab. But it's amazing as a knockout weapon on its own, but it's also a great initiator. It's a great way to get in because you've slipped inside the opponent's jab, you're already moving into inside position, and you're throwing the right over the top, and it often knocks them off balance. You'll see the odd weird one, like Aldo versus Korean Zombie. He tears his shoulder out by cross-countering. I think he misses his head for the most part, but because the arm's over the shoulder, it's like one of those old arm locks you'd see in like a bullshido-y jiu-jitsu video where they do the razor arm lock on the shoulder, but against a standing punching opponent. But yeah, it throws the opponent off balance because whatever you do, you're going to hit their upper body, whether it's their shoulder, the top of their head. You're not going to catch the temple every time, but you will knock them off balance. So a lot of guys get in with the left hook afterwards, or they just swarm in. Think Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney too, things like that. But the interesting thing is looking at it, when you throw like a more straight, you straighten the elbow as you punch rather than swing over the top. If you throw the cross counter like that, you drive the opponent's head and upper body back into their right of their stance. And because they're almost, they're going to be jabbing, that's the time you throw the counter. So they're jabbing, so they've come off the back foot, they've extended their stance, so they can't move their back foot back to catch themselves. So often what happens is their lead foot comes in and they stumble backwards, almost facing away from you. And I've seen it a lot of times, and I've never put two and two together and said, oh yeah, a step-up high kick off the cross-counter would work really well. And then I saw this, and I was like, I don't know if that was spur of the moment, if he just wanted to throw a high kick then, or if that's something he's been practicing as a counter combination. But it's so, like an uppercut left hook, lift the head, turn it, or left hook to slap the guard right straight down the middle. Blows that synergize perfectly like that. They are the sort of setups that become the ones we love. And the two blows in this one really synergize nicely. And the reason that I'm bringing it up and waxing lyrical about it is because in the Stephen Thompson-Vicente Luque fight, Vicente Luque lands the cross counter all the time. And if you watched his fight with Urbosa, he lands he throws the cross counter, he cracks him, I think it's like the top of the head or the shoulder, it might not even connect, but it throws Urbosa off balance, and Vicente Luque moves in and swarms on him with punches and knocks him out along the fence. Because he's completely out of position because he got knocked off balance. But in the Thompson-Luque fight, Luque timed his jab about 5 or 6 times, whether it was when his back was to the fence or out in the open. And each time, Thompson went backwards into his stance and off to that side, out of control, exactly the same way that Gregor Gillespie did when Kevin Lee hit him with the cross counter over the top. And I've showed all the examples of it in my post-fight analysis article. Plug for that. Sorry, I did that yesterday. But yeah, it's pretty incredible. You're going, fucking hell, is that counter is that counter combination going to be, is that going to become something? That would be really interesting. I'm certainly going to be practicing it. Yeah, if Luke had stepped in with the high kick afterwards like Lee did on a couple of those occasions, who knows? He might have got himself a surprise knockout. But moving on to that fight, because I'm not talking about Blagoy Ivanov versus Derek Lewis. I was never going to, and I refused to. But Stephen Thompson versus Vicente Luque, beautiful performance from Stephen Thompson. We wrote an article for the Patreon boys about this earlier in the week. Basically what we expected. I said, if Luke can't put him near the fence, Thompson's style is set up so that he's never, he's going to struggle to hit him with counters. Thompson's going to be feinting and coming in on him and angling out in the open. And the more of this fight I watched, the more I realised that Stephen Thompson does a lot of things. He's got a lot of weird different styles that he shows. It's not just the lead leg kicking. It's not just the drop-off open side counter. He's using his jab more effectively than ever. He was using the jab as like a V-step, so he'd go in and then back to his left, back and to the left. And then so he'd go around Luke a couple of times that way, and then he'd do the exact same feint and step out to his right and come in with the right hand V-step that he did against Masvidal to get Masvidal on one leg and knock him down. He was doing that over and over again against Luke because Luke was trying to time him moving around to the left. There was the wheel kick, he switches to land a wheel kick through so that the heel comes through the open side. There was some side kicking, knocked Luke over with a couple of side kicks. There was the usual timing with the left straight up the centre when Luke came forward, knocked him down in the third round. I mean, it was just a beautiful performance from Stephen Thompson, but not faultless, as I was saying. Like, Luke. The whole thing about Luke is that he has an iron head, and he counters everything with either an overhand, with a cross counter, or a left hook. He closes the door on everything with the left hook. And Stephen Thompson, every time Luke was hurt and Stephen Thompson was moving in on him along the fence, I was like, oh, fucking hell, what's going to happen here? Because Thompson would come in with like a 1-2 and try and pull his head back because he knew Luke was going to try and take his head off. Thompson, you can't be hanging around in the pocket with Vicente Luke throwing combinations, especially if you're someone like Thompson, whose boxing really is better suited to 1-2 shots at a time, because you're good at the getting in and getting out, but you're not so good at moving your head, covering up on the inside. So that fight was awesome. And then your co-main event was Darren Till versus Kelvin Gastelum. Obviously, I can understand why a lot of people felt disappointed about this, because it was big bangers. My Unibet piece, they titled it like, Darren Till needs to use his kicking game to win this one. And then all the headlines afterwards was, Darren Till uses kicking game to win fight. But I was really impressed by Darren Till. I thought it's not the kind of fight that, is going to continue the hype train. But it is the kind of fight that shows people who know what they're watching that he is working on the stuff that was getting him in trouble. He was going back on straight lines. He's holding his chin up in the air. He was, he'd throw his wickedly fast punches and then try and pull his head back. And then if the opponent hit him, he'd just mean mug. And then, obviously at some point you're going to get caught by one that you don't see coming, or you don't clench up in time for or roll with. And he did against Jorge Masvidal and against Tyron Woodley. From the get-go, like, Kelvin Gastelum tries to burst in on him. He ducks in on a clinch. He hit him with a couple of nodders. He did headbutt him in the grill a couple of times. But by tying up, you remove the opponent's offense, and then he'd throw long kicks and straights out in the open, and tie up after when Gastelum came in, try for a couple of knees, things like that. When Gastelum came in, you saw he was going back and then off to his left side. He was angling off on retreat, which is really important because that was something that he never really did. It was just encouraging because all the shit that was going to get him caught again down the line, even if he came out and blew out Kelvin Gastelum in the first round, I'd be going, yeah, but it's only a matter of time till you get cracked with your head up in the air again, because you're always moving back on a straight line and your head's always up in the air. So the fact that he's dealing with that, and there was even a little bit of Adesanya in there. He was framing off him as he was moving, as he was retreating and cutting off line. So yeah, that was encouraging. And of course, Gastelum, small for the weight class, but still a very good wrestler. So encouraging that Till can handle him in the clinch and, for the most part, deal with takedown attempts. So that was UFC 244. It was pretty good. Let's do a couple of questions and then we'll get out of here till Thursday. Hi Jack! Obviously I'm a big fan of MMA, but after an especially violent UFC card this weekend, especially the Gillespie and Tavares KOs, I was thinking a lot about head trauma. Oh yeah, this sounds familiar. Although as a category of injury, head trauma is clearly a necessary component of MMA, it feels a little troubling to watch perennial journeymen/contenders like Tavares and Arlovski get sent out of orbit, and people like the Diaz brothers get praised for their ability to get brain damaged while staying conscious. When it comes to fighters like Arlovski, brackets, Weidman, Rockhold, Vic, etc., do you think the organisation should play a bigger role in phasing fighters out of competition? Do you know of any ways to mitigate this kind of damage beyond medical suspensions after KOs? And do you ever have trouble reconciling your love for the sport with the fact that plenty of fighters we love will have early onset dementia in 30 years' time? Huge admirer of the podcast and granite chins blessed, Joe. This is the thing that, I'm sure all of you go through this, but particularly as someone who makes their living talking about guys getting hit in the head, getting knocked out, you're always going to have this. You're always going to be like, oh yeah, people are getting absolutely torn to shreds doing this sport. They're going to have miserable later lives. The one I always think about, well, it doesn't impact people equally, which is the thing that is both terrifying and also a lot of fighters use it to convince themselves that it won't be them. Because like George Chuvalo, who's famous for having one of the best chins of all time in boxing, he fought George Foreman, was never off his feet, got absolutely battered by these people. You don't get known for having a good chin unless you really hammer the point home by getting hit in the face a lot. But he is still lucid and a good speaker and a fascinating interview at the age of 70, 80, whatever he is. Jerry Quarry, who was around about the same time, never really took horrendous beatings. It was just a journeyman, did good stuff, gave Ali a tough fight in Ali's return from exile, had good fights with other greats of the era. But when he retired from boxing, 4 years later, he had completely no recollection of where he was. His brother had to move in with his brother, lived with him. His brother was his carer, and his brother just said, like, if I turn my back for a minute or I go to get some milk from the fridge or something, Jerry might just walk out the front door. And Jerry Quarry's brother always blamed their father for that, because apparently their father put them all into boxing, and he desperately wanted one of his sons to be a world champion. But yeah, very depressing. But yeah, it doesn't hit people equally. We don't really understand why brain trauma. Well, it's the same thing as, like, you know, the Phineas Gage thing. You can get whole chunks of your brain blown out and be functionally largely the same. Or you can have a little bit of damage and change personality completely. You know, I always think about lobotomies and things like that. You know, there are people who are lobotomized who are, to all intents and purposes, the same as they were before they were lobotomized. Maybe their personalities changed a little bit, but then there are people who are lobotomized and they can't do things for themselves. You know, I mean, obviously the lobotomy was a very roundabout procedure. It was literally an ice pick put in between the eyeball and the top of the eye socket and then jiggled around. But it just tells you there's an awful lot about the brain we don't know, and it seems like you could put your finger on one part and the person would just go completely limp, or you could jam your finger into another part and nothing would happen. But I think that's part of why a lot of fighters can put it out of their mind, because there are fighters who have long careers, taken head trauma, and don't come across as punchy. They come across as surprisingly eloquent for a pro fighter. When it comes to, like, Arlovski and people like that, Arlovski is a heavyweight, and he's a long-serving heavyweight, and he's got a reputation as a knockout artist, even though he hasn't knocked anyone out in years and just sort of leans on people. But do not underestimate the appeal of being knockoutable. You know, that's also worth paying for. In that fight where Arlovski did nothing and then got face planted in, like, a minute or whatever it was, he earned $320,000. The average US wage, I think this is the mean. The median would be a better measure, because it's not going to be thrown off by the hyper wealthy at the other end, because we should be throwing them off instead. But the mean average income in the US last year was something like $60,000. So Arlovski's getting paid like 6 years of work for that, just to get face planted by Rosenstruck. He's not going to give up. Like, he's not going to hang him up until he feels his health is severely compromised, which will only happen once the damage is done. You know, the damage is already done. Do not kid yourself for a second. Andrei Arlovski, Overeem, people like that, they already have significant brain trauma. It would be impossible for them to get hit like they do, and not. It's just not manifesting itself yet. But, anytime Arlovski or Overeem wins a fight, they can buy a house with the money from one fight. I mean, why would you stop? It's down to the commissions, and there are only like 2 commissions that actually matter. And the one that does, one of the ones that does, the New York Commission, people are always mad about them overstepping their role anyway. And if the commissions do step in, we'll just take them somewhere else. You know, they've already done this with Arlovski. When he was getting stopped 4 or 5 times back to back in like 2015, 2016, might be 2017, I forget. He was stopped 5 times back to back, so they were taking him to European events until he got a win again. Because for some reason, the actual commissions are as stupid as fans, and they're like, "Oh, he won a fight. Well, he's not done then. You know, he's not punchy because he won a fight." Here's the thing: like, Nate Diaz could be literally lobotomized, and he would still beat the shit out of most of us. You know, if the thing is, like, he's got to not be able to win any more fights before we say, yeah, we don't want you anymore. You're never going to get these guys out of the game. And the problem, of course, is if they give up Arlovski, he immediately goes to Bellator and becomes a draw there. Knocks out some scrub. Coker says, well, he could be the best heavyweight in the world, but the UFC aren't returning my calls. I'm happy to co-promote a champion versus champion title fight. There ain't no way to stop it, is what I'm saying. Guys are going to fight on too long. It's going to take them realizing that they've had significant brain damage and for it to manifest before they consider stopping. Cheers, Joe. Dear Jack Slack, without too much buttering up, I just wanted to say I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm currently listening to all your podcasts chronologically from the beginning. Oh, I wouldn't do that. It's interesting hearing you go from ultra-organised and reserved about your judgments to shitting on Valentina and fans and calling the BMF title the bitch boys with no wrestling title. To the actual question, though, what do you think, what do you look for in a good commentator? Do you personally prefer the Dominic Cruz approach, super analytical and focused, at the risk of being dry and uninteresting, or the Joe Rogan approach, who, while being knowledgeable, tends to act more like a fan, which can lead to memorable moments, yet also spread misconceptions and common fan myths? At 244, he mentioned that Valentina Shevchenko is one of the best overall martial artists today, regardless of gender. Thanks for the time. I hope you answer. From Ronan. Keating, I presume. I think it takes all kinds of people to make a world. No, I think the correct answer is a balance, and they've worked this out on US broadcasts for years now. You have a technical guy or a color guy and a play-by-play guy or whatever. But in mixed martial arts respect, you have one guy to talk about what's going on. You have another guy to pad stuff out with this is the Mike Goldberg / John Anik role is to keep things moving, to bring up interesting things when there's gaps in the what's happening on air, and then you have people like Dominic Cruz, Daniel Cormier, professionals who can come in and talk about interesting stuff going on in the fight. And you don't have to be a professional to do that, but someone who is going to talk about the ins and outs of the fight. And then if someone gets kicked in the dick, you bring in Mark Ratner for no reason. When I went to, which one was it? It might have been the O2. But one of the UK events I went to as press, backstage, Mark Ratner's at the buffet just filling his boots. And so someone who was clearly from like some newspaper or something was like, "Oh, so what do you do here?" And he's just like, "Oh, well, I used to be on the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and now I just sort of come places with the UFC." And he's just like standing there eating his stuff off a plate while standing there and talking to this guy. And I just thought, yeah, well done, Mark Ratner. I couldn't justify your job. They tried to bring him in the other day, and the microphone didn't work. I can't remember what fight that was. Someone got kicked in the dick. They tried to bring him in, and then they couldn't get the microphone working, and they were like, we'll try and get Mark Ratner back, and they couldn't, and then they just went back to the action, and nothing was lost or gained by not having Mark Ratner there. But anyway, as I was saying, yeah, I think the problem almost always is a lack of balance in the booth. Now, when you have John Anik and, say, Dominic Cruz or someone, Dominic Cruz is, John Anik's pretty good at offsetting Dominic Cruz, actually, but Dominic Cruz is, I don't know. He seems like a hyper autist, if I'm honest, but he's a spiky guy. And certainly through his early appearances, he had a lot of trouble. Like, you felt that there was a lot of beef between him and anyone he was talking to. Whereas if you get Dominic Cruz and Daniel Cormier on, now that's interesting because that's like two guys doing the technique stuff. But when they're on together, you get a sort of fun back and forth relationship between two very knowledgeable guys. But I'm always saying, like, the Bellator booth is fucking horrible. Unless Maro's in, because I like Maro. But even then, it's not great, but I think that's more to do with a lack of something than to do with who's in it. I mean, Big John and Goldie are like the bottom of the barrel commentary team, but if you put Jimmy Smith in there and had someone to talk about what's going on in the fight and not just to laugh and go, well, size of the dog in the fight, dog fight, just size dog, size of the dog. We've got ourselves a fight here. If you had someone in there talking about stuff so that the other two didn't have to blather inanely, because they got to fill airtime. They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. So, they're just going to go, on this card it says that Paul Daly in 2015, nice back elbow. Paul Daly in 2015 bought a cat. If you had that third guy in there, Jimmy Smith, I think that booth would be massively improved. And you could hide the fact that Big John is useless and Mike Goldberg is literally just a soundboard and reading off cards. But equally, I love Gooden and Hardy, but you add Felder to that mix, and it feels like there's a guy just trying to justify why he's there, and that's a really awkward booth. And I love Paul Felder as a fighter and as a person, just saying in that booth he's cringe. So it's down to chemistry, it's down to roles. You've got to have all the roles filled, I feel, or at least two guys who can cover all the roles between them. And I also think I don't know, because I feel like it helps if a fighter on commentary. It gets kind of cringe when they bring their own position in the division in, or start like, you got the sense that Dominic Cruz was kind of pissy during bantamweight fights when he first started out, but equally it's sometimes fun to hear them talk about their own fights, and like when Dominic Cruz is talking about how you stop the high crotch and DC's going, don't tell him, Dom, don't tell him. So it's weird. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a grouchy motherfucker. Maybe that's the thing. But I can tell you that objectively, the Bellator booth is horrible, and they should do something to change that. The other thing is, like, one person on air has to be a mouthpiece. That's the job. Like John Anik has to read out sponsorships and has to say the things he's told to by the company. Brendan Fitzgerald has to say, that will be the first defense of the new BMF belt. Because they're told to. But if all they do is say what they're told to, you get the one experience, which is truly bizarre. Because I love Michael Chiavello. I know that he's a very knowledgeable guy. And he's out there going, and we're being broadcast in 400 countries, and there's 6 billion people watching. And he has to repeat that every 10 minutes. And you're going, I know you don't believe this, Michael. What the fuck? And then start talking about honor and bollocks. Maybe he believes the honour and bollocks, but he can't believe the nonsense numbers that he's asked to quote. Anyway, cheers, Ronan Keating. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. We'll be back on Thursday. If you want to read my post-fight breakdown, the more formal one with the diagrams and shit to look at, join the Patreon and support the podcast so I can do this twice a week and keep writing interesting shit. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightscorebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to read what I've written at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Cheers! There was a pretty good chance that Nate was going to do him in the fourth, though.